Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. There's a few things I wanted to talk about today. Hope your week is going great. I've had some pretty interesting developments, let's say. I've started, building a little community around my book and things like that, and around my tarot methods and stuff, which I find pretty interesting. And I've been exploring like the community on Reddit and things like that, and I've got some things to say and to show. So I thought I'd do something of a preamble today, because I want to talk about tarot history in the near future, so probably in the next video or maybe the video after that. But I thought I'd go into like my beliefs around tarot on a more concrete level, and this came about by like my recent exposure to the secular tarot scene, secular tarot community, let's say, right? So I recently joined a tarot subreddit called Secular Tarot, and I'm going to show you right away. That's this one here, our Secular Tarot. And there's a whole philosophy around this that has been, kind of, I mean, not a very big deal, but like as you can see, there's quite a few members here, and obviously there's a lot of overlap with other tarot communities and stuff like that. You can find some videos on YouTube that are mildly interesting. And this whole, kind of like, we engage with the practice, but we don't, we try to avoid saying that it's supernatural and this and that. And I think it's kind of cute. I don't personally, I think, I don't blame the people who do this, but, I just thought I'd talk about this phenomenon today and about what I think tarot actually is, because I don't think, obviously you can approach it like in a secular way, but I don't think that's sufficient, let's say, to explain. Well, my whole goal is not even to explain what the tarot does or whatever. I'm trying to get to a completely different point. So what I'm trying to get at is like the shortcomings of this kind of mindset, right? And what you're kind of I don't know, like missing out on, maybe, what you're kind of trying, the kind of pitfalls that you're risking yourself falling into when you kind of think of it that way. So before I start, I thought I'd show you this book. I've talked about it before, but I've started reading it now, and obviously, like, I have my misgivings about this type of philosophy as well. And you could say, like, Camellia Elias is definitely, like, in my opinion, in my view, the epitome, or like the how do you say, the paragon, let's say, of like secular tarot, So she and both she and Enrique Enriquez, and this, this kind of way of thinking has become kind of in vogue in the tarot community in general now. But at the same time, you still have this secular tarot community and stuff, and they're just not, largely, as far as I can tell on the group, not aware of this of the method that she proposes, right? And her method is basically like, look at the cards, look at the pictures, and just interpret what the pictures are telling you, right? Obviously, and you might even say, like, it's kind of, I mean, it's an interesting book for sure. And I definitely think there's a lot to say about what she's, or a lot to say for what she's saying about the tarot, right? That the pictures themselves are also are also speaking through the cards, and that you can make sense of a reading by looking at the pictures alone. But I don't think that's sufficient, right? And I'll give you an example, just so that's just so we get an idea what we're talking about, right? Let's go with our Jodorowsky tarot. I think it's a great deck to do that kind of thing, especially because of the added symbolism that he's mixed in this whole thing, right? And let's just, I don't know, let's just draw some cards at random. Nothing special. I'm not trying to do a reading right now. Just trying to demonstrate what I'm kind of talking about, right? So just right. So we have 3 cards here. We have the 8 of Cups, the Queen of Swords, and the Empress. So obviously, as you can see, 2 of the 3 cards right now also have words, right? So you don't need to just rely on the picture, right? There's a reason why cards are named the way they are, and especially in the Tarot de Marseille, there's also a reason why they're spelled the way they are, right? And here, obviously, it's l'Impératrice with a C, the correct spelling, but in a lot of older tarot decks, Tarot de Marseille decks, you will see it with an S, l'Impératrice. Things like that, right? Or Rennes, instead of Rennes, you'll see Rouen, for example, things like that. So what I'm trying to get at is that the cards give you more information than just the picture, and obviously you can look at what the picture is doing, where she's looking, so she's clearly looking at the cups, right? And there may be a connection there, and you can connect like the colors maybe with each other, or like maybe like the specific cup she's looking at, which might be like this one or the one in the middle, because that's on that line of sight. Maybe that's relevant, and all that stuff could be interesting, right? But I think of those things, personally at least, as like happenstance, or not happenstance. Nothing is coincidental, obviously, in the tarot, but like as an extra, right? So you could have a synchronicity there. You could have something happening as you're doing the reading, but you're still going to have to rely on certain concepts that are just inherent in the symbolism of the cards, right? And that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. I'm not saying you should rely on keywords, but the tarot is still a language that you have to learn and to become fluent in, right? And this fluidity, let's say, in this speech, in this language, is what's going to enable you to do a reading, right? And obviously, I'm not going to, and that's the other aspect that I want to touch upon. I'm not going to say that this is some supernatural process, or that learning this language is what makes you psychic, but it's definitely, because it may or may not exist, but I do believe in like intuition, right? And it's definitely a way to train that intuition to get to the heart of the matter and things like that. So, but obviously there's a point to what Camelia Elias is saying, right? And it's just like, you have to acquaint yourself through constant practice, through constant exposure, through constant questioning, to what the cards are doing, right? And if there's nothing else to go on, then you can at least fall back on that. And there's a lot of value there for that. But the thing is, like, like, it's a decidedly postmodern take on tarot, and Enriquez is even stranger, or even more extreme in that regard. But they both have a point in saying that when it comes to reading the cards, the whole tarot history and the whole symbolism and the whole like correspondences and all that stuff is actually kind of irrelevant, if not completely, right? So that's one aspect of this. So, I have a few examples that I want to get at, right? So if we go to that subreddit, which I find endlessly fascinating, because they have certain rules, and obviously, look, I don't want to put anyone on blast. Obviously, like all the usernames here are anonymous, so I don't think I'm breaching anyone's privacy here. This is all public information. You can visit the group at anytime you like. And I don't want to, judge anyone for their beliefs or whatever. And I mean, I get what they're trying to do, right? So they try to distance themselves from the shady reputation that the tarot may or may not have, based on whether people believe in fortune telling and divination and things like that. Personally, I don't believe there's, and I've said this in my book as well, I don't believe there's any difference between the two. There's no difference between divination and fortune telling. All divination, all readings are predictive, or are an attempt to be predictive, right? Even if you're talking about the past or the future, or psychological processes, trying to do a consultation, let's say, for someone else, you're still trying to guess at what's in their head, at what they are feeling, at what they want to hear, at what their interests are. You don't know everything about a person, so you're just trying to get insight, and you're using the cards. And obviously, the best thing, obviously you need to have something to go on. So usually you'll ask them for a question. That's the best way to go about it, to have something concrete to read into. But you're still guessing. So whether you look at it as divination or fortune telling is the same thing. So if we go to this group, there's a few guidelines here about like, let's see, do not engage in bad faith, do not give blah blah. But so here, participation from users who have faith-based practices is welcome, but please be aware of the burden of proof. If you do not want your beliefs to be questioned or critiqued, please do not bring them into the discussion. So that's all perfectly reasonable, perfectly respectable. But obviously, personally, I don't think there's any beliefs. So I don't think there's... How do I say this? I don't think there's any reason to think that tarot is in any way faith-based system or whatever, right? Sorry, I had to turn the light on, so sorry about the lighting now, because it's getting dark right now. Right, so even when people are saying like, yeah, I'm communicating with my higher self, I'm seeking guidance from like some, from spirits in the cards, or from the some pagan deities or whatever, or stuff like that. In the end, all there is the cards and you, right? And you can interpret it however you want, but if you're honest to yourself, that's all there is. And trying to make sense of that. And, despite that, there's still an aspect of it that works. Despite that, we're still having this empirical experience that the cards are telling us something valuable, right? And that there's synchronicities happening, that there's things that we recognize in the cards and that are coming up, and that are proving that our readings have some sort of meaning, right? And that we have something to offer when we're doing a reading for someone else and things like that, right? And so this whole argument, and it's funny too, because like I was watching this one video, I can show you the link, from this other group that's related to this one, right? RSS witches. I mean, so those are skeptical witches, right? So that's their thing, and they do tarot too, and they had this whole presentation about tarot, which they put on YouTube. You can look it up. It's pretty nice. It's pretty funny. I mean, they're just a bunch of kids explaining how their experiences with tarot, and how, and doing like a little workshop with each other on a video call. All fine and dandy, But they all keep falling into this relativistic approach, like, it's all fine if you if you interpret it as you're talking to the universe, or to higher beings, or to your higher self, or to all these different things. But that's not secular tarot, right? So that's not that, you're still putting a faith-based thing into this, and you're making like but you're still being skeptical about it. I mean, okay, but then why even do that in the first place, So, so if we look at this group, there's a few discussions that I participated in yesterday, right? And those are kind of interesting. So I wanted to kind of give an example of what I'm trying to say, because it's kind of a tough thing. Because again, I don't want to discredit anyone. I don't want to make anyone, that's not my point. I'm trying to give my 2 cents and explain what I think the tarot is, to try to explain my beliefs, and my secular beliefs as well as my spiritual beliefs, because to me they're interwoven and they're one and the same. I cannot have one without the other, because I have I have a certain philosophical training, right? Because I'm a philosophy graduate as well, but I'll get to that in due time, right? So if we go to this one, right? This one was the first I saw yesterday, and he has this question. He has this question, right? And I'll zoom in a little bit for you to see better. I don't know if it's a he or she, doesn't matter. I struggle with reading the justice and judgment cards in a secular context. Justice is the skills and right triumphs. Judgment, especially in the art with the Rider-Waite-Smith image, is hard to divorce from the end of times without making it a duplicate of simple justice. Comments, suggestions, and criticism are welcome, right? And there's a bunch of comments. I'll get to mine later, right? And they all like, I read somewhere that recently the difference between justice and vengeance is that judgment, I think, is that justice ends with things more stable, and vengeance ends with them less stable. Those two ideas depend heavily on our conceptions of right and wrong and the state of the world. Huh? Okay, and then we have like justice I associate with legal rights in society. I guess it's more about group-oriented justice that is enforced externally. Judgment I associate with to being true to what is right within. So while justice is external accountability, judgment is internal accountability. There may be things you want to deny or not face, possibly things that no one else wants to know, or may know, sorry. It is up to you to face them. For me, justice is about balance, fairness, accountability, questions. You notice they all say for me, right? So for me is this and that, for me is that and that. So that's all very relativistic. But what does the language even say, right? And so my answer is very simple. I read justice as balancing and fairness, right? Justice. You have a court of justice. You have a difference that you want to solve. Very simple, right? Fairness, equality, setting things to rights, blah blah blah. While judgment is a realization, epiphany, or revelation. Why do I say that? Right? Judgment. Trust your judgment. When someone comes to you to read the cards for them, what do? They trust your judgment. It's right there in the word, guys. Judgment is a realization, and it's funny too, because I use the word revelation, right? Revelation. What's the Greek word for revelation? It's apocalypsis. So if you have religious imagery there, it talks about revelation. It talks about a realization. It talks about an epiphany. It talks about something that is unveiled, something that is revealed to you. That is judgment. It has nothing to do with justice in that sense. I mean, it has to do with justice, but because, everyone is going to be judged in the day of judgment, right? But a judgment is a decision that is being made on the day of judgment. right? While justice is the principle of weighing things against each other, right? And being fair and giving everyone an equal chance and all that stuff. So it's all in the language, right? Tarot is a language. You need to learn the language before you start making, how do you say? Before you start making assumptions. So if you're just going to talk out your ass like that, you can't say you're practicing secular tarot. This is like woo woo talk. There's no sense to what is being said here, right? So if you want to be secular tarot reader, you need to look at what's on the cards. What is actually happening? What do these symbols mean? They're very simple. They're not complicated, really. Like, I mean, even if we're just talking about, like, obviously we're talking about societal conventions, right? So the symbolism exists because it's part of our language, of our culture. That's what we've grown up with. That's what we've learned and internalized through all these years. And it's Western iconography, right? So this is our culture that is being depicted here, right? So this stuff is very elemental. And you'll also notice, right? This comment got like, I mean, it's not a lot, but it's like 11 upvotes, where all the others 6, 6, 4, 4, 3, 3, 4, 5, 2, 2, 2. So actually, even though I didn't get a response from the OP, everyone actually agrees with my assessment, which is very, I mean, it's self-evident. It's easy. It's like, it's elemental. It's elementary. It's like, how hard can this be, right? So this is one example, right? And then we go to the next. The other one I found even more interesting because this is actually like serendipitous, and here it's where we get to the meat of the tarot of things. Did they remove it? Oh, you gotta be kidding me. Oh, they removed it. That pisses me off. I should have taken screenshots. But so there was another post. That's annoying, guys. Oh, come on. That's really annoying. But there was another post about a person who was going to go on a trip with some guy, and as far as I could tell, they had like some romantic interest in them. And they had done a reading beforehand. But all they said in the post was like, "Why? How could the cards be so wrong? This guy, he wasn't distant at all. How could I have misread it?" But there was no context, and so I was like the first to comment there, and I was like, I don't want to be, I don't want to pry, but like it could be helpful if you told us what cards you pulled. I don't want to know any personal details, but like I want to know. I need, if you want our help, we need to know what cards you pulled, so we know what went wrong. And so they gave me a spread, and if I remember correctly, it was, what was it? It was like 6 of Cups reversed, the Hermit, non-reversed, and then like the Knight of Cups reversed, the something else, and so like 4 out of 5 cards were reversed, right? And they were all romantic cards, like so 6 of Cups, the Hermit, Knight of Cups, the Wheel of Fortune, and I don't remember the last one, but it doesn't matter. All the cards except for the Hermit were reversed. And I was like, I was like literally the third, my response to that, when she posted her response to my comment, was like maybe the third or fourth comment in total, right? And I was like, look, I don't want to make fun of you or something, but it seems to me like, given the number of reverses, that you read the spread upside down. So you were holding the deck upside down and you just spread it out and you just took it for what it was. But like, actually, it's all the opposite, right? So the guy is actually really interested in you, but the Hermit is the only card that's upside down, which means that he's actually not even it's not even in his nature to be to isolate himself or to be distant, right? So it's the exact opposite of what she read. And then there were a bunch of other, especially one person that I found pretty, that's very characteristic in this on Reddit, because I've seen them on multiple. Oh, it's still there. Oh, that's great. Oh no. Well, it's not there, but my comment is still visible, right? So here. Yeah. Okay, so the original post is removed. I might actually still make some screenshots once I'm done with this. Right, so some context might be helpful. What cards did you pull? Blah, blah, blah. So it was like, what concrete action will this person take toward me to his trip? Attitude of the first day, start of the trip. 5 of Wands reversed, and the Hermit. So obviously 5 of Wands reversed, obviously if you turn it around, it could still be like difficult, right? Direct gestures, 6 of Pentacles reversed. So that speaks of generosity and balance and things like that. Things they will avoid, not do. Knight of Cups reversed. And then a key moment between us, the Wheel of Fortune reversed. How the energy between us ends, those are actually 6 cards. Page of Swords reversed, right? So, given the number of reversed cards, it could be that you read the spread upside down, which would mean the Hermit is the only card that is not reversed. That is reversed, sorry. All the others are not reversed. That would honestly explain a lot. Not trying to make fun of you or anything, but it seems pretty suspicious. Either way, given that it's still the first day, it could be too early to tell, blah, blah, blah. And she thanked me for it, right? I assume it's a she, to be honest, but I might be wrong. But so here's this person, right? Playing research. This person, I'm not gonna assume their gender, but they always write like this, honey. They always start with honey, and then they start patronizing you, right? I'm not gonna go into the details because I honestly, it honestly makes me cringe. I cannot stand this way of writing. But she has this, he or she has this character, right? And they just keep doing this. But I doubt they even looked at their response at the actual cards, right? If you look at their response, they didn't even. Yeah, they did respond, so that's interesting too. I'll have to look into that. But anyway, so what I'm trying to get at, so we got the we got the, how do you say, the gossip out of the way, right? The small how do you say, a small town gossip out of the way. What I'm trying to get at is there's a very straightforward way of looking at the cards, right? They're just pictures and words, and you can make sense of them. But in my opinion, even if you take it secularly, even if you embrace the cards with a secular philosophy, let's say, even if you embrace the secular philosophy, even if you're skeptical about your readings and your approach to the cards, that doesn't make them any less how do you say, serendipitous, or synchronistic, or I hesitate to use the word metaphysical because I've had a philosophical training, and I'll get to that in a moment, but there is something else going on in that interaction between us and the cards, right? So in order to try to explain what I'm trying to say here, and I mean it's and now it's gonna go, so far it's been a little bit of high school gossip and stuff like that, but it's gonna get into real bad shit territory, right? Because I don't know if you've read The Blind Watchmaker, right? Or The God Delusion, Dawkins, or Daniel Dennett, right? So even if you take it on a on a Darwinian level, right? The tarot is a meme, right? It's literally it's a memetic language. It's a system, right, that has its internal consistency, just like our language that we speak to each other, has its internal consistency. And if you know what memes are, they're like these cultural aggregates that they're basically a very basic form of living organism in that, and that has as its only goal to multiply itself, right? And this is funny because like this is I learned this in philosophy and in college, right? But if you look at it a little bit differently, it's exactly the same as Plato's world of ideas, right? Because as Plato says, like all the things in reality, right? Like this chair, this table, right? This card, right? This glass, this cigarette, they're all copies of the ideal image, the idea of that thing, right? And every copy is a copy of a copy, and every copy has more and more like well, not maybe more and more, like some copies are better than others, but every copy has defects compared to the real thing, and tarot is one of the most characteristic examples of that. There's like, and I showed you in my previous video, I showed you all these decks, all these variations that exist of the same thing. Most of them are based on the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition, right? But a tradition alone is already like a memetic procession, let's say, from one end to the other. And it's like, how do you call this game? Like Chinese whispers, right? Where you whisper into someone's ear, and you have a whole row of people, and they whisper in their ear, and so on. And, at the end, usually what comes out is completely different from what the first person said, because there's always misunderstandings. There's always, it's always deformed and mutated when it comes out on the other end, right? And that's what happens in the whole of history, in the whole of like any tradition, right? And that's what happens in the tarot. But in my opinion, obviously, and if you look at it from a secular point of view, that's not necessarily something bad, right? So every mutation can have something valuable, right? So, for example, Jodorowsky took the Tarot de Marseille, and he started seeing things in it, right? That weren't there initially, right? So, for example, he added like this crescent in the star's hair, right? Or he added the lips in her navel, in her belly button. Or he added like, or here for where is she? He added like this little thing. I mean, it was already there. Like if you look on older decks, but he made it into like this facsimile of like a coin, right? Of a card of the coin suits. So let's see if we can find it. Here you go. Right. So this thing, you'll see the similarity with this thing on her head, right? And stuff like that. And for example, like I showed that in a previous video, he did. He turned the tower, he turned it a few degrees so that you could see the door where this guy falls out of. Right? While normally this isn't visible and it's cut off here, and you only see the upper part of his body, and you don't see this. Things like that. And in his opinion, he was revealing the real truths of the Tarot de Marseille. And why not? Maybe he's right. Maybe that is the real truth of the Tarot de Marseille. But like the true value of what he has done in this symbolism comes out when you start using these cards for your reading rather than another deck of Tarot de Marseille, right? There are thousands of Tarot de Marseille right now, especially because it's become in vogue lately, right? There's a million of interpretations, but at the same time, Siniyakateva, ela, trago do Yeah, I'll give her some attention a bit later on. My cat thought she could just next time in a few minutes. So you get where I'm what I'm getting at, right? But at the same time, I do believe there's such a thing as defacing or denigrating or how do you say, like ruining the real value, the insight of the tarot, right? And that's a problem that needs to be discussed. We need to get at the bottom of, because it's not easy, if you're interested in art and stuff like that, and or in divination and stuff like that, what's where do we draw the line between like relativism and like valuable contribution, valuable mutations, valuable changes to the aggregate of the tarot? And it's funny, I keep saying aggregate, which is not incorrect, by the way, but you could also think of the tarot as an egregore, right? As an egregore. And if you don't know what an egregore is, an egregore, it's like, it comes from the Greek word egregoros, right? And egregoros are the watchers, so that comes from like the Book of Enoch and like the fallen angels and the Nephilim and all that stuff. So an egregore, and that it's a funny thing, because I wait, let me check who came up with the term egregore. I will Google that. Because it's from sociology or something like that. Let me see. The term egregore was popularized in modern occultism by the French author Victor Hugo. Oh, and Eliphas Levi. Interesting. But there was modern usage. It's still occult. Okay, I actually thought an egregore, René Guénon, esotericism, Gary Lechman. Okay, I would have sworn that it was a sociological term as well, or like a cultural philosophical term, right? But an egregore, you get what I mean, right? An egregore is like an entity that exists in the collective subconscious, right? So it's not exactly. So you could look at it secularly, right? It's not, but it is analogous to a demonic entity, or like an angelic entity, or however you want to see it, or like a jinn or something like that, or a genius, right? But an egregore is an entity that exists in our collective subconscious, and the tarot is such a thing, right? So even like if you look at it through the lens of like Dawkins or Dennett, right? Through a Darwinian lens, an egregore is a meme, is a memetic aggregate, a cultural, how do you say? Like a cultural, what's the word again? There was a word for that. Wait, let me just see if I can find it here. Memetics. Right, we can just talk about it. Darwinian, the unit of culture. That's not a good word. The principle called universal Darwinism as information being copied, varied, and selected. A process also known as variation and selective retention. The conveyor of information being copied, known as a replicator. With the gene function, so we are replicators, you and I, right? Using the tarot, or using our language, or using a cultural, how do you say, like habit, ethos, or whatever you want to call it. Like a complex, meme complex or memeplex, things like that, right? So you get what I mean. So even like in Darwinism, even like on a secular level, even like in scientism, right? You have these egregores that are called memetic complexes or memeplexes or whatever, right? So it's the same thing. It's a living thing. It's a living organism like on a very basic level, right? Which how do you say? Which owes its existence to its replication. And we are basically their victims. We are basically the replicators. So we're they're parasitizing our brains, and we're transmitting them around, right? Using these words, using these habits, convincing others to do the same thing, reading the tarot, reading the Quran, reading the Bible, doing our crosses or our prayers, things like that, right? And birds do the same thing. They have their bird songs and they learn them from anywhere they want. And if you look at certain types of birds, like the lyre birds and stuff like that, they imitate anything they can find that they think sounds interesting, right? So that's what memetics is about, right? So even if you look at it secularly, we are being influenced by like external organisms, right? So according to Dawkins, we're not even capable of thinking independently because all our thoughts are words, right? All our thoughts is in language, and all our all our habits and our mannerisms are based on things we've learned somewhere and imitated, right? And it's the same with the tarot. But where does the tarot, where does the value lie? And that's where it gets interesting for me, right? So in my opinion, in my belief, the tarot is the de facto philosophical tool, and it's very interesting because that is in the way I what I've discovered recently. And I mean, I'm not the one who discovered it, but like I'm expanding on the things I've learned recently, right? So you have Christophe Poncet, for example, and he's very interesting because he talks about how his theory is that the Tarot de Marseille was developed by Marsilio Ficino, who took this idea from Platonic philosophy and applied it to the Trionfi from the Italian Renaissance, to this iconography like of the Trionfi, and he created this tableau of like the 22 major arcana, right? And that's his like summary or like a condensation of like the Platonic philosophy. Say hi to the camera. Say hi to the camera, Cindy. Yeah, you're going down now? Yeah, I'll get back to you later. So, oh, Cindy. So, right, and it starts there, right? And and it's funny because like my teacher back in the day, who was into memetics and all that stuff, he was like, yeah, there's no world of ideas and things like that. But at the same time, if you think about it, this whole ideology that Plato had created talks about the same thing, about how all the things in the world, right, like chairs, houses, dogs, horses, words, people, glasses, clothes, you name it, like anything you can think of, right, that exists in the world is like a copy of like an ideal image that exists somewhere. It doesn't exist somewhere, but it exists somewhere, in our imagination, in the world of imagination, right, in a transcendent plane of imagination, because that's essentially what it is. It's distilled down into reality, but like in this process of it manifesting, it becomes defective. But like in that defect, there are already like there's interesting things happening, right? But Plato has he has his own like, and he thinks that those defects are a bad thing. But obviously, there's other ways to look at it. And for example, Aristotle, and I talked about Aristotle in my video on the Tarot of Paris, right? And I urge you to watch it if you haven't, right? In those defects and in those variations is where interesting things start to happen and where an evolution starts to appear, right? And the tarot has gone through an evolution, right? So you could look at it from a Darwinian lens and still say it's a living, breathing book of knowledge, right? That has evolved through the ages and has given us, treasures of symbolism and knowledge. and stuff like that, and has evolved alongside us, and has but at the same time, um, the whole, and it's funny because because we're still in this, how do you say, in this dichotomy between like this Platonic and this Darwinian view, right? Because we still, like, every guy who sits down to make a new deck, right? And I will do the same thing if I ever make a new deck, right? Their aim is to go to the original Platonic idea and to create the purest, most pristine tarot deck, right? And that's amazing. I mean, that's just so funny, because in the end, what they're doing is just creating another evolution and another mutation and another, how do you say, like, innovation, right? And you could say it's like a defect, or you could say it's like it's something valuable that's being added on. Like it's a difference that makes a change. So for example, like the definition of information, I don't remember who came up with that, but like the definition of information is any difference that makes a difference. That's what information is, right? And in the tarot, the only valuable deck is any difference that makes a difference, right? That's why my collection is like only like maybe, I don't know, I have maybe like 20 decks. I'm not interested in buying all the decks in the world. Like there's a few that and there's a bunch of decks that I don't even use. And so I'm trying to focus and hone in on decks that reflect my values, and that I can vibe with. If I can vibe with them, then there's no value to them for me. So anyway, I hope that made sense. I mean, it's obviously it's still a scary concept, right? Because there might be something to what the church is saying and stuff like that. If we consider, even if we take it from a Darwinian point of view, like you being interested in the tarot could be like a pollution of your brain, right? It could be a parasite having sat down on your brain, like just like the fucking worm in the jungle, which has this parasite in its brain, and suddenly, or the snail, and suddenly its antennas get all these weird colors, and they start, and they, and they start infecting other snails, and then the worm starts replicating itself, the virus, let's say, through them. We are subject to viruses as well, both physical as well as mental viruses, right? And those, and especially the mental ones, are a lot harder to discern, right? So it might be some sort of sickness. But I'll give you one thing before I close, right? Because the one thing that this teacher, his name was Oudemans, right? The one thing that he taught us was like, if we are being controlled by our language and by those memes, right? And by these cultural aggregates that are making our brain do all these things. Where do we find our independent thought? How can we practice philosophy? And he says the only way we can do that is if we make a turn, right? He calls it a kwartslag. He was Dutch. So if we make a turn and we manage to notice ourselves being influenced. How are we being influenced? What effect does it have on us? And that's where the tarot becomes interesting, because we can look at the cards and we can see how it affects us, right? And it's always a meta game. It's always a meta game. So when you're getting to that stage of approaching the cards, whether that is through the symbolism or just through looking at the pictures, right? Whether you're following Camelia Elias's methods, or whether you use like your keywords and your little white books, yeah. Regardless of how you do it, you need to look at how are you being manipulated by the cards, right? How are you being influenced? And maybe that's the only way we can talk about secular tarot, right? So I hope that helps, and I'll see you guys next. So then my next video is going to be about the history, maybe, Maybe something else comes up, but this was just something interesting I thought of. So, yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.